The outer stair sensor hadn't triggered in 3 years. It went off at 02:17 during a storm that should have killed anything outside. Cabel Vale had lived on the lighthouse for 3 years, long enough to stop naming the storms. They arrived in November and stayed until March. And in between there was fog, so thick you could press your palm into it and feel it resist. The lighthouse itself hadn't functioned as a navigation aid in decades. The automated beacon on the eastern promontory handled that now. What remained was the keeper's cottage attached to the base. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a sleeping loft, and the tower above it, which Cabel climbed every morning to watch the sea, and every evening to watch it again. He had come here after the war. Not the official war, the one with borders and treaties and memorial statues. The other kind? The kind that ended when someone higher up decided to call it something else. He'd been a field medic with the Interstellar Humanitarian Corps for 11 years. He'd seen enough broken things that he'd stopped being surprised by them. Now he repaired equipment. Generators, sonar buoys, weather instruments for the coastal monitoring station 2 kilometers inland. He drove the supply road on Tuesdays. He read. He was 38 years old, and most days that felt like enough. The night she came, the storm was already bad. He'd been tracking it since noon. A Class 3, coastal surge pushing in from the northwest, the kind that turned the rocky cove below the lighthouse into white chaos. He'd secured the generator housing, weighted down the supply crates, and was settling in with tea and a technical, manual when the sensors on the outer stairs triggered. He didn't reach for his jacket first. He reached for the lamp. She was at the base of the eastern stairs, pressed into the stone alcove that faced away from the wind. She'd made it there from somewhere else. He could tell by the trail of wet across the steps, and by the fact that she was sitting completely still in the way that injured things sit still, as though motion itself had become the enemy. He held the lamp up. She was small. Her skin had a faint iridescence that the stormlight caught strangely. Blues and grays shifting like oil on water, a biological feature he recognized but had not seen up close before. The Velshani were rare in this part of the system. Rarer still without a transit permit, a handler, a visible collar. She had none of those things. What she had was a gash along her left side, deep enough to have bled through 2 layers of clothing, and eyes that went wide when she saw him. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to fear, the moment before a creature decides whether to bolt or freeze. She froze. He crouched down slowly, the way he used to crouch near frightened animals and frightened children and frightened soldiers in the field, making himself small, keeping his hands visible, not moving toward her at all. "You're bleeding," he said. "I'm going to go inside and get a kit. You can come in or not. The door will be open." He went inside. He put the kit on the table. He did not stand in the doorway. 5 minutes later, she came in. The wound was not the worst of it. He'd seen enough field injuries to treat the laceration without drama. Cleaned, sealed with biofoam, taped. She sat on the stool beside the kitchen counter and let him work, which surprised him. She watched his hands the entire time, not his face. She flinched once, hard, when he reached past her for the tape, and he stopped and waited, and said nothing until her breathing settled. Her clothing was wrong for the weather. Thin, synthetic, the kind of featureless gray that came standard in service sector assignments. No personal items, no bag, no identification disc at her collar, which by law she was required to wear. He didn't mention the identification disc. He made soup. She watched him make it. He set a bowl in front of her and sat on the other side of the table with his own and began eating, slowly looking at his bowl, not watching her, not waiting for her. For a long time she didn't move. Then she lifted the spoon. She ate carefully, like she was doing math. Small amounts, testing. Her eyes kept moving to the window, to the door, to him. But she finished the bowl. When she put the spoon down, something in her shoulders dropped a half-inch. Such a small thing, and so telling. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "You can sleep in the loft. The storm will be through by morning." She looked at him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible, and formally structured in the way that meant she'd been trained to speak to superiors. "I will not cause difficulty," she said. I know, he said. She didn't leave in the morning. The storm had stripped 3 of the exterior sensor mounts from the tower, and Cabel spent the first half of the day on the scaffolding doing repairs. He should have done 2 weeks ago. When he came down, she was in the kitchen. She had washed the dishes from the night before and was standing at the window looking at the cove. He hadn't asked her to do anything. He didn't comment. He made coffee and sat at the table with a circuit board he'd been troubleshooting for the coastal station. She turned from the window eventually and sat in the other chair and watched him work. He handed her a small instrument, a calibration probe, without explanation. She held it, turned it over. He pointed to where it needed to be applied. She applied it. This became their first language. For 2 days, they communicated mostly through objects and tasks. He would hold something up. She would watch and eventually try. When she made a mistake, he showed the correction without making it into a lesson. When she got something right, he simply moved to the next thing. On the 3rd day, she found a notepad on the shelf and brought it to the table with a pencil and drew him a shape. A circle with a line through it. He looked at it for a moment. He drew a question mark. She drew an island. Then a boat moving away from the island. He drew a boat moving toward the island and added a small figure standing still. She stared at it for a long time. Then she drew a very small figure with its feet on the island, looking out at the water, not leaving, just looking. He made tea. It was a week before he saw the brand. She'd been washing her arm at the sink when her sleeve slipped. It was on the inside of her left forearm. A registration mark, the kind burned into property, not skin. 2 rows of characters, a catalog number, and below it, a classification code. He recognized the format. He'd seen it in corpse briefings. Registered companions were documented this way under the Unified Sentient Property Act, Act that 17 systems had refused to ratify, and 12 had challenged, and which nonetheless persisted because the entities that benefited from it had enough legislative weight to keep it surviving. She saw him see it. She pulled her sleeve down immediately, quickly, with practiced efficiency, the motion of someone who had learned that other people's recognition of the mark led to complicated outcomes. She kept her eyes on the sink. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Does it hurt still?" he asked finally. A pause. "No." "Okay." He went back to the circuit board. After a while, she came and sat across from him. He heard her breathing steady out. Later that day, she said for the first time, "Cabel." Just his name. Trying the shape of it. He looked up. "Yes," he said. She looked at the table. Then she said it again, more quietly. Cabel. Like she was storing it somewhere. The first time she laughed, he nearly dropped his coffee. He'd been explaining, badly, in retrospect, how the anemometer worked, using hand gestures that grew more elaborate and less informative as he went. And at some point, his impression of a wind vane spinning in a gale became its own small disaster of flailing arms and overturned pencil cup. She watched the pencils scatter across the floor. Then she made a sound he hadn't heard from her before. Short, surprised. Quickly swallowed, but real. She covered her mouth with her hand. He picked up the pencils. He didn't make a thing of it. But when he sat back down, he was smiling, and he didn't hide that either. She uncovered her mouth slowly. The next morning, she pointed at the anemometer on the roof and made a spinning gesture. She was still doing the gesture from the day before, the overblown one. He did it back, worse. She made the sound again, longer this time, and she didn't cover her mouth. That evening, she told him her name. Not the registration designation on her arm. Her name. The one she said she had given herself in private years ago, when she'd understood that the name her owners used was a filing label, and that somewhere underneath it there was a self that deserved something better. "Sova," she said. "That is what I call myself." He put down his book. "Sova," he said. "That's a good name." She looked at the lamp for a long time. Then she said, "They told me that was not real. That names assigned by units are not legal designations. A lot of things are legal that aren't right," Cabel said. "And a lot of things are right that aren't legal." Your name is your name. No one gave it to you and no one can take it. She was quiet for a long time. Sova, she said finally, softly, to herself. The beacon signal activated on a Tuesday. Cabel found it during his morning equipment. Check. A subdued transponder. Ping on the recovery frequency, cycling every 40 seconds, broadcasting from somewhere in the cottage. He traced it to a small device sewn into the lining of her collar, almost invisible. Not the kind of tracker placed for someone's safety. The kind placed for someone else's convenience. He brought it to the table without turning it off. He set it in front of her. She stared at it. Her face went still in a way he hadn't seen in days. You knew it was there, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth. I was afraid to remove it, she said. There are protocols. If it stops transmitting, they send a recovery team, he said. She nodded. How long have they been receiving the signal from here? She looked at her hands. 10 days. He turned the tracker over in his hands. He could disable it in 30 seconds. He could destroy it and buy them more time, a few weeks maybe, before a sweep drone picked up the last known location. He could pack her into his supply, vehicle and drive the coast road and try to get her to the northern transport hub, where the Velshani diaspora community had some unofficial infrastructure. Some people who had been helping people like her for years. He laid all of this out for her, quietly, without pressure. Any of these, he said. Or something else. But it's your choice. Not mine. She looked at the tracker for a long time. What will happen to you? She asked. If they come here, I'll be fined, he said. Possibly. Harboring an unregistered asset. Under the USPA, they can bring a civil claim. I've looked at the framework. The criminal threshold requires demonstrated concealment intent, which is harder to prove. She looked at him. You looked at the framework. I had some time, he said. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, I don't want to run anymore. They came 3 days later. 2 of them, in a standard recovery vessel, civilian contracted, not military, which was the normal way these things worked. A man and a woman in unmarked gray coveralls, carrying a property manifest and a handheld scanner. They anchored in the cove and came up the rock stairs without radioing ahead. The scanner would have told them the tracker was still active. Cabel was on the scaffolding when they arrived. He climbed down. They showed him a custody document. Clean paperwork, properly stamped. The asset, they said, was designated Unit 7 Vel Cascade 88, registered to Orland Domestic Holdings, listed as absconded 41 days prior. They were authorized to retrieve it and return it for reprocessing. Not her. It? The document said it throughout. She's not here, Cabel said. Sir, the transponder signal is originating from this structure. Then your equipment is malfunctioning. The woman with the scanner looked at it. She looked at him. She said, Sir, obstruction of recovery. I know the statute, Cabel said. The door opened behind him. He had not told her to do this. He had not planned this. When he turned, she was standing in the doorway in the morning light. And she looked different than he had ever seen her look. Not small. Not still. She was looking directly at the 2 recovery agents. And her expression was the expression of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had run out of places to put it. My name, she said clearly to them, is Sova. The woman with the scanner began to respond. Sova raised her left arm, the one with the brand, and held it out toward them. And then she kept speaking. I am Velshani. I am sentient under the Inter-System Accord of 2187, Article 12, which supersedes any domestic property, registration where the registered entity meets the threshold for sapient. Self-determination. I am declaring my own name and my own continued presence at this location by choice. She paused. I have prepared a formal declaration. It is filed with the Accord Registry as of 40 minutes ago. A silence. The 2 agents looked at each other. The man checked his device. Cabel had not known about the filing. She had used his terminal at 4 a.m, 3 days ago, when she'd told him she didn't want to run anymore. She hadn't said what she was going to do instead. The Accord filing triggers a mandatory review stay, Sova said. Under Article 12, Subprovision 4, You cannot complete the recovery action until the review is concluded. You should know this. The woman lowered the scanner. The review can take months, the man said. He sounded not angry, but annoyed, the way bureaucrats sound when procedures get complicated. Yes, said Sova. I know. They left, not permanently. They'd be back with lawyers and different paperwork and a longer process. Cabel knew that. Sova knew that. But they left, and the cove was quiet again, and the wind came off the water the way it always did. He found her sitting on the rock bench at the edge of the lighthouse walk, facing west. The sea was gray and silver, and the light was doing what it did in the late afternoon, turning everything a little unreal. He sat beside her. He didn't speak first. I looked it up 3 weeks ago, she said eventually. The accord provision. I wasn't sure if it would work for someone registered before. 2187, there's case law. It's complicated. You could have told me. I wasn't sure I was going to do it, she said. Until I was. He understood that. He'd made enough decisions in the field that way, not knowing until the moment arrived. The review could go either way, he said. I know. You're still here. I know, she said again. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I decided that if I was going to belong somewhere, I would choose it, even if they can still argue about whether the choice is legal. She paused. The choice is still the choice. He looked out at the water. Sova, he said. She turned to look at him. For what it's worth, he said, you've been good company. She considered this. It was the kind of statement that, in a life without much kindness, took a moment to land properly. You fixed my wound, she said, and gave me soup. Yeah, and looked up the legal framework. I had some time, he said again. She turned back to the sea. After a while, without any particular weight, she said, You're not good at receiving gratitude. I'm working on it. A pause. Then that sound. The short, real laugh, fully unguarded now. She didn't cover her mouth. They sat there as the light changed. The automated beacon on the eastern promontory clicked on, as it always did, casting its regular pulse across the water, not asking anything, not expecting a response, simply marking where it was so that other things could navigate. Below, the sea moved against the rocks. Above, the old tower stood. She was still there. She had chosen to be. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.